National Catholic Register. This is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
As the country of Syria labors to establish order and peace in the aftermath of the fall of the regime of Bashar al-Assad, Christians and religious minorities have been caught often in the upheaval. We're joined this week by EWTN News contributor Ambassador Alberto Fernandez with analysis. And then, Catholic business leaders and innovators are leaving their mark on the world of entrepreneurship. We talked to Register Senior Editor Jonathan Liedl and Register contributor James Day about a theology of entrepreneurship. Hello, I'm Matthew Bunson, host of Register Radio and EWTN News' Vice President and Editorial Director. I'm joined in studio here in Washington, D.C., as always, by Shannon Mullen, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register. Shannon, how are you?
Hello, Matthew.
I look forward, before we wrap up our show today, I want to hear about what we've got in the print edition, so let's remember to do that.
Absolutely.
But let's start with Syria. The overthrow of the longtime Assad dictatorship in Syria has ushered into power an Islamist government that brought fears of persecution of religious minorities, including, of course, the ancient and long-suffering Christian population. As the government has struggled to establish stability, violence and insurgency have erupted. So what exactly is happening in Syria? I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by one of our great experts here at EWTN News on the whole of the Middle East, and that is Alberto Fernandez, who is a former U.S. diplomat and now a contributor at EWTN News. Alberto, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew and Shannon.
Well, there has been quite a bit of focus the last couple of weeks on Syria and obviously the various insurgencies, but we've also seen a great deal of social media uproar about the possibility of Christians being persecuted there. Before we head into that, though, let's do a bit of a table set here. Where are we in Syria with this new government?
Well, the government, of course, is relatively new. It came in on December 8th is when Damascus fell, shockingly so, and with very little bloodshed. And you have an interim government. You have demands for political reform, for democracy, for economic situation. Syria is in a disastrous state. It's impoverished. The people are suffering. They have no food, no electricity, no water, no jobs. So the government's trying to do what it can, and of course it has a huge ideological burden as well, given its makeup.
Alberto, when this new regime came to power several months ago, there was this fear of reprisals and bloodshed. As you said, it was relatively little violence. Why all of a sudden the change?
Well, two things have happened, and when we forget the first, we focus on the second one, but they're connected, which is last week, exactly a week ago today, there was an armed uprising in the region of Syria where the Alawite religious minority, kind of heterodox Muslim group of which the Assad regime came from, there was an insurgency that rose up. And so people were attacked, people were killed, hundreds of civilians were killed, a lot of government troops were killed by, you could say, Assad bitter enders or Assad regime elements drawn from the Alawite community. They killed a lot of people. And then the government, the Islamist government, responded. And, of course, they responded in a very brutal way and kind of did to the Alawite fighters and civilians what had been done to them. And I think we have to remember that there's an element of blood feud and of revenge here that is different than any other ethnic conflict in Syria. In other words, it doesn't exist with the Kurds. It doesn't exist with the Druze. It doesn't exist with Christians. There's this blood feud or this sense of revenge or counter-revenge exists between the Sunni Muslim majority and the Alawite minority, which, of course, ruled Syria through the Assad regime for 50 years.
So the new government itself is trying, obviously, then to establish itself in some form of stable leadership roles. Where does all of that stand? Because for the average person who's looking at Syria, they hear about an Islamist regime now. They hear about former Assad elements roaming the country, and then there's obviously the influence of Turkey, there's the influence of Russia and the United States. It's almost like a chessboard or a checkerboard at this point. What are the prospects then of this regime actually hanging on?
Well, it's a chaotic situation, and what the regime is trying to do is to control as much as it can the situation. That's why, for example, you had an agreement with the Kurds this week, and they're close to an agreement with the Druze in the south. But it's always been, and this has always been the risk that people like myself and others pointed out early on. It's a regime that is an Islamist regime, and that's not a surprise. That's not hidden. But it also doesn't control all the forces on its own side. So, for example, some of the units that seem to have committed the worst atrocities against Alawites are units directly connected to Turkey, funded, and they were basically owned by Turkey, and the Turks used them against the Kurds. So when the conflict erupted last week, those units were moved from the north to the conflict area, and these guys behaved like they behaved against Kurdish civilians, murdering civilians, looting and robbing, and just kind of misbehaving.
So what is the situation then facing Christians in this evolving and potentially very dangerous set of circumstances?
Well, if you follow directly the church leadership, the bishops and the patriarchs and archbishops and what they've said, Christians were not directly targeted as Christians, which I guess is a small consolation. Near the area of conflict, there are Christian villages that were untouched. In fact, there's a large Christian area not far from the conflict called the Valley of the Christians, Wadi al-Nasara, and that area was completely untouched. But Christians in the conflict zone were caught up, and depending on who you follow, 8, 9, 12 Christians were killed. Now, we're talking about several thousand people may have been killed. Some of them were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Others may have been killed because they're Christians. They may have been martyred indeed. But even if Christians were not targeted, the brutality and the savagery of what we saw last week sends a terrible message to Christians and other minorities in Syria that they are, at risk. Because Christians are going to be asking themselves, okay, these were the Alawites. There's kind of bad blood between the Alawites and the Sunni Muslims. But who's to say that tomorrow the same jihadists that were turned against them are not going to be turned against us?
Alberto, over the weekend, we saw reports inaccurately say that, hundreds, perhaps hundreds of Christians were being slaughtered. Where did those reports come from? And as it turns out, that's not the case, thank goodness. So what was the motive, do you think, in putting that narrative out?
Well, the virtual space, the social media space for Syria is one of the most contested and crowded ones in the world, and it has been for over a decade. The propaganda that you saw, for example, that ISIS used was developed in Syria. Propaganda that Iran and Russia used was developed and deployed in Syria over the past decade. So what you had every player that had a role in the Syrian situation from their own point of view kind of piling on. So, for example, you had pro-Kurdish sites highlighting the slaughter in Syria to kind of say, we should hold on to our weapons, right? Look at these guys. You had the Iranians and other supporters of Assad highlighting the massacres, right? And kind of exaggerating and always adding, Christians and Alawites, as if Christians were being killed by the hundreds, which they weren't. Pro-Israeli sites, anti-Islamist sites, of which there are a lot in the Middle East and in the West. And of course, there are regimes that don't like the interim government in Damascus. They're scared that not so much that the Islamists in Damascus may fail, but that they might win. And if they win and you have a viable working Islamist alternative to the other dictatorships in the region, that's a risk. That's a risk to Gulf states, it's a risk to Jordan, that's a risk to Egypt, etc.
What is the risk, for example, here in the United States, of that propaganda influencing our foreign policy towards Syria?
Well, I mean, it's a problem. I tell you, it's a thorny problem because hundreds, if not thousands, of innocent people were just killed in Syria, and that's a really bad thing. But it's not helpful if it's presented in a false way, right? So we need to be alarmed about the situation in Syria without being hysterical, because we want to preserve the Christian communities in Syria. We want to help them. We certainly want to pressure the government in Damascus to treat Syrian Christians well and to treat to be tolerant and to be respectful of other religious minorities. So it's kind of the boy who cried wolf syndrome, except that a really bad thing happened, just not the thing that a lot of people were pushing.
Yeah, you've mentioned the various Christian leaders in the region. In your piece at ncregister.com, In Syria, Real Massacres, Phantom Killings, Constant Threats is the name of your piece. I encourage everyone to go to ncregister.com to read it. But you also have a statement from the Latin Bishop of Aleppo, Hannah Jalouf, in which he issues his support for the Syrian state against those trying to destabilize the country. In a broader sense, what role can these Christian leaders have in the future of Syria?
Well, first of all, one has to recognize that with the exception of Lebanon, Christians are dependent on a non-Christian regime, right? And so Christians are always going to have to make deals or kind of find ways to find some kind of working relationship with whoever is in charge. So that's why Bishop Jalouf's, statement is important. He's supporting the government. He's supporting the Islamist government. What would people expect him to do, right? He's not going to support the Assad regime, which doesn't exist anymore. And there's not like there's a viable alternative. So he's going to call, as many Christians would, as the other Christians leaders have, calling for law and order, calling for good governance, calling for tolerance, for an end to violence. If Syria has a truly functioning state, that should give security to Christians. That's the hope, anyway.
Yeah. Well, Alberto, as always, we appreciate your insights and your expertise on this, and I know we'll be leaning on you in the future for as much coverage as we can of this important topic. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, you're listening to Register Radio here on EWTN Radio. Coming up, we're going to talk about a Catholic theology of entrepreneurship. Stay tuned to Register Radio here on EWTN.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
And welcome back. I'm Matthew Bunson. In recent decades, especially coming after the Second Vatican Council, the Church has dedicated considerable thought to business and entrepreneurship, developing what can even be called a theology of entrepreneurship. The Register has taken a very long look at the Church's teachings on this subject, but we've also met up with some of the foremost and interesting Catholic entrepreneurs, business founders, and executives who are out there. And Shannon, what was the brainchild for this?
I think one of the things that we want to do at the Register is expand our coverage of business. It has a direct impact on our Catholic readers, whether it's inflation, whether it's the difficult housing market that we're facing, or maybe they just want to understand this whole tariff business that's going on, unfolding here in Washington. So this is part of that. We decided to take a look at Catholic entrepreneurs who are also in the news. Of course, Elon Musk, we hear about him on an hourly basis, Donald Trump, but also here at EWTN, our foundress, Mother Angelica, was also a Catholic entrepreneur.
Rather brilliant one, in fact.
Yeah. The classic garage startup.
Yeah.
So that was the impetus for this.
So Jonathan, let's bring you in as our senior editor here at the Register, and you have sort of an anchor piece for our coverage, and that is the theology of Catholic entrepreneurship. I think some people might be surprised to hear that there could be such a thing, but you really do lay this out rather well, and you have foundations from John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Pope Francis.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really something that I think with Vatican II, and the Church's attention really to that universal call of holiness, right? That holiness is not just something reserved for priests and religious, but really is something that all of us are called to, including those, working in the world, working in business. And that kind of very much was had always been a reality, but was an invitation then for further popes to go deeper. And of course, John Paul II, we know, with his emphasis on the law of the gift and serving others with the gifts that he received, was an important step in this. Benedict XVI as well. And Pope Francis also has called business a noble vocation. There's an emphasis not just on, well, how do we make business ethical and avoid being bad and avoid being sinful and corrupt and all that kind of stuff, but really a recognition that business leaders, entrepreneurs, innovators are actually called to participate in God's co-creation, are called to participate in the stewardship of natural resources, of different individuals' gifts and talents, and really have a positive contribution to make. So it's definitely a shift that we've seen. It's kind of an ongoing theological development, I would say, with more room to grow, especially as we talk about tech and AI and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, we're seeing some promising steps in that direction.
Jonathan, I think we could say that the Catholic view of entrepreneurism is, it's not just about profits. It's about using your God-given talents, your resources to serve the greater good. As you talked to these entrepreneurs in your story, what struck you about how they integrate those principles?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll highlight one person I talked to, Peter Rex, who has a tech startup down in Austin, Texas, kind of really using some cutting edge technology to sort of disrupt the real estate market and to aid small business owners and things like that. I think what strikes me is that, exactly as you said, Shannon, different people have been given different gifts. And I think we think often that, if you're a serious Catholic and you want to change the world for the good, you want to build the kingdom of God, well, of course, the priesthood, your religious life, if you're called to that, is a beautiful way to do that. We also talk a lot about government, public service, things like that. Of course, family life is very important. But business and really entrepreneurship, which involves creativity and risk-taking and innovation, and sometimes looking at things differently, right, than the rest of those normal people do, that has a place too. And so talking to Peter Rex, that was his experience. He went to seminary, right? He was really serious about serving God. He went to seminary. He found out that he didn't quite fit there. Then he tried to get involved in politics, and he found that was also somewhat restrictive. But he has these gifts in these different areas, creativity, innovation, leadership. And it was when he was basically stumbled his way into pursuing these entrepreneurial endeavors that things clicked for him, and he really felt like he was living his vocation out. Not just making a profit, but serving the world by offering, helpful tools that can help people find homes, run their small business. And also, it was really interesting talking about his employees because, he's in Austin, Texas. We're talking about the tech industry. So he's like, most of these people, have not been to church, do not go to church at all. And yet really kind of using Catholic social teaching and its emphasis on human flourishing, really able to kind of incorporate a lot of those principles into the culture in his office. And he's really excited about that. And he's not shy about sharing that he's a Catholic with his employees as well. But one takeaway from all the people I talked to, if I can say it, is just being rooted in Christ, right? Prayer, sacramental life, daily routine, prioritizing those things is something that was underscored by everyone I talked to as essential of serving Christ in the church in this arena.
Yeah, and in your discussion with Peter Rex, he mentions, you note, that a great step in the right direction for the church might be canonizing more Catholic entrepreneurs. And I know one of the ones that a lot of people are noticing is Enrique Ernesto Shaw, who's a 20th century Argentinian businessman. And James Day, I want to bring you in to this conversation because I know that you have focused some of your interest on Shaw.
And I'm happy to be here, and I'll echo what Jonathan just was mentioning about the integration of the entrepreneurs in the Catholic life. That is what Enrique Shaw embodied. He was an Argentine, and he was only 41 when he died from cancer. I think it's important to note that he died in 1962. So while we often cite Vatican II, rightly so, as being integral in the development of the Catholic entrepreneur idea, Shaw was really doing that before and during the council himself. He was a father of 9, and he really actively sought out church mentors to establish the Catholic social doctrine within his businesses on a very practical level. I didn't actually know anything about Shaw until about 2 years ago. I was producing a show for EWTN television called The Hour of the Lady, hosted by Christopher Pereira of the Tepeyac Leadership Initiative. His guest on that particular episode was John Bakura, formerly of the Bush School of Business. And they mentioned Shaw in this discussion on Catholic professionals. That was the first time I heard of him. So when I was doing the piece on Shaw, who's on the path towards sainthood, the medical miracle just passed the review stage for him. So he's definitely on the way. But I reached out to John Bakura and Christopher Pereira. I said, could you provide a quote on Shaw? That's when I first heard of him, and for this piece that I did. So yeah, he's definitely on his way in terms of becoming more prominently known. But I'll just say also that EWTN has actually been on the forefront of recognizing the importance of the entrepreneur in Catholic life. One of our great partners is, of course, the Napa Institute. And every year for EWTN Television, I'm there as one of the producers for that project. And while I'm there working, I'm a journalist, so I'm listening with one ear what the presenters and what people are saying during the conference. And you can see what Tim Bush is doing and what others are doing and wanting to establish this as a foundational, fundamental element of Catholic life amongst the laity.
Yeah, I'd like both of you guys to weigh in on this. What challenges do these business leaders face in balancing their Catholic faith and just the realities of the business world?
For Enrique Shaw, he was actually persecuted by Juan Perón, who was in his first term as the Argentine president during a Catholic wave of persecution. And so that was a real element, one of the great things about Shaw is how practical and how his takeaways are so, just tangible. Father of 9, for instance, he practiced what he preached is what I'm saying. So to be a target of the Perón regime shows me that Shaw was on the right track, that he was implementing in a way that was affecting workers on the ground, the Catholic social doctrine in a way that was affecting not only these workers, but was also catching the eye of the government in a way that they didn't like.
Jonathan, briefly, we've got about a minute, but what are some of the challenges? It's not all about making profits, but these business people have to succeed. The pressure is intense.
Profit sometimes, the word kind of taken in isolation implies greed or selfishness or something like that. But the reality underscored to me by a number of people I talked to, and not all of this made it into the story, is that you need to keep the business going, right? If you have a sense that the business has something to offer the world, right? If you're either providing some kind of, improvement to people's living conditions, you've got employees who depend upon you. You've got people who are receiving your product as well. So I think striking the right balance there is important. Discerning how to have a Catholic workplace, right? What benefits do you offer people? You'd love to offer them, 6 months of maternity leave or something like that. But that can be a challenge, too, when we talk about the practical realities that different entities face. So those are a lot of it. I mean, we talk about a lot of these principles, these Vatican documents are very helpful, but a lot of it is prudence, right, which is practical wisdom. And how do you take these things? And like James was saying, Venerable Enrique Ernesto Shaw did, like, how do you apply it? And that's the challenge. That's what people are trying to do now, and that's what people like that hopefully Saint to be can provide us some inspiration with.
Well, Jonathan and James, thank you so much for your work, and we're all looking forward to reading all of our coverage on Catholic entrepreneurship.
Thanks so much.
Well, Shannon, very briefly, what can we look for in this upcoming issue?
Well, we're coming up on St. Patrick's Day. There's a great piece about a pilgrimage site in the northern part of Ireland called Patrick's Purgatory. I think our readers will really enjoy that.
All right. Well, that's it for this week here on Register Radio. Remember, for more news, analysis, and commentary, check out the National Catholic Register online at ncregister.com. Thanks so much for joining us here on Register Radio, here on EWTN. Until next week, on behalf of our producer, Michael McCall, Shannon Mullen, I'm Matthew Bunson. Please take care and God bless.